Amara was washing the dishes, thinking about other things, when suddenly she felt very dizzy, like a train had hit her. She grabbed the edge of the sink, hoping the feeling would go away. But instead of feeling better, a sharp pain shot through her stomach. She quickly put her hand on her big, swollen belly, which was now 7 months pregnant. She knew the baby wasn't supposed to come yet, but the contractions were strong and hurt a lot. Her legs felt wobbly, and her vision started to blur. She stumbled toward the phone on the kitchen table, struggling with every step. Finally, she managed to call a taxi. When the cab arrived, the driver, a big man in his 50s, saw that Amara looked very upset and rushed to help her. "Please take me to the hospital fast," Amara gasped, holding her belly as she struggled to breathe. The cab driver, looking worried, stepped on the gas, and the car zoomed through the streets. For Amara, every second felt like a long time because of her nausea and dizziness. When they reached the hospital, the staff quickly got her into a wheelchair. She could barely talk now, and her words were all mixed up. "Don't worry, ma'am. You're in good hands," a nurse said kindly as they hurried her down the hall to the delivery room. Dr. Thompson, a calm and experienced doctor, came to check on Amara. He noticed that she wasn't dilated enough, so he knew they couldn't wait. "We need to do an emergency C-section. Prep the room," he commanded, and the nurses jumped into action to get everything ready. While Dr. Thompson went to wash his hands for the surgery, the minutes felt like hours to Amara. Everyone was worried, but then the door swung open. A man in surgical scrubs came in, his face covered by a mask. He pointed to his throat, as if he couldn't speak because of laryngitis. The assisting doctor was confused, but understood the gesture and thought he was supposed to take over. "You want me to do it?" the assisting doctor asked, surprised. The masked doctor nodded silently, so the assisting doctor started the C-section while the silent doctor watched. Everything seemed to be going fine until Amara, barely awake, opened her eyes. Something about the masked doctor felt familiar. Panic rushed through her, and she tried to scream, but only a soft whimper came out. She pointed weakly at him, trying to warn the others. The nurses rushed over, thinking she was just scared. "It's okay, you're safe," one nurse said gently, stroking Amara's arm to calm her down. But the masked doctor made another gesture, this time toward the anesthesiologist. "General anesthesia?" the anesthesiologist asked, unsure. The doctor nodded again, and though it wasn't normal, the anesthesiologist agreed to give it to Amara. Amara fell into a deep sleep as the surgery continued. Finally, the baby was delivered, and his tiny cries filled the room. Everyone felt relieved, and some nurses even clapped softly. The assisting doctor smiled as he handed the scissors to the masked doctor to cut the umbilical cord. But the masked doctor seemed unsure and clumsy as he cut the cord. Then something strange happened. The baby, who had been crying, suddenly stopped and opened his eyes, staring right at the masked doctor. What happened next was shocking. In a voice so quiet, it was almost a whisper, the baby said a clear word. The masked doctor froze and exclaimed, "Did you all hear that?" His eyes were wide with shock as he looked at the others. The nurses and surgical team were confused and shook their heads. "Did you hear what the baby said?" he asked again, his voice trembling. Everyone was silent, unsure of what to say. The doctor grew more upset and grabbed his head, clearly confused. It was obvious that no one else had heard the baby speak. "Get him away from me!" the doctor suddenly yelled, panic creeping into his voice. He was shaking now, and without another word, he let go of the baby, who landed gently on Amara's chest. Amara was still unconscious from the anesthesia. Everyone stood frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. The nurses rushed to check on the baby, who started crying again as soon as he was on his mother's chest. No one could explain why the doctor had run away or what they had just witnessed. One nurse, still shaken, said, "Something was off about that doctor. I think he believed the baby spoke to him." The others looked at each other in disbelief. It didn't make sense. Babies couldn't talk right after being born. Their brains weren't developed enough to understand words, and while they could cry, they couldn't speak. Still, a strange feeling filled the room. Some staff members held the baby close, hoping he might say something else, but he just kept crying. The atmosphere grew heavy with confusion until suddenly, a loud beeping interrupted. The heart monitor was sounding alarms. "She's crashing," one nurse screamed as she rushed to the machines. With the main doctor gone, the attending physician took charge. "Give her 1 milligram of epinephrine now," he shouted urgently, calling for the defibrillator. "We're losing her," he cried as the situation grew more frantic. "It must be the general anesthesia," the attending doctor said nervously. The anesthesiologist looked scared and stammered. "I only did what the doctor ordered. It was him who wanted the general anesthesia." Meanwhile, one nurse kept cradling the baby away from the chaos. The baby continued to cry, not understanding what was happening as the team fought to save his mother's life. Amara had already been through so much, feeling heartbroken after losing her husband, Lucas. Then there was Mark, a man at her office who had always seemed polite, but something about him began to feel wrong. He stared at her a little too long, making her uncomfortable. At first, she ignored it, but one day when her husband wasn't there, Mark crossed a line. "I've loved you in secret all this time, Amara," he said, stepping too close. Before she could react, he grabbed her from behind. Shocked and scared, Amara managed to break free and slapped him hard across the face. "Don't you ever touch me again," she shouted, shaking with anger. "I love my husband, and I'm having his baby. If you come near me again, I'll tell him everything." Mark, with his face red from anger, glared at her with a scary look. "You will be mine sooner or later," he muttered under his breath as he walked away. Amara almost told her husband about what happened, but she decided against it. Amara wanted to forget about what happened with her husband, Mark, but 3 months later, she got a call from the authorities. They told her that her husband had died in a car accident. She was shocked and heartbroken. When she went to identify his body, she noticed a voicemail from him, which was left just before the crash. She felt sad looking at it but couldn't listen to the message. It hurt too much to think about it. As the investigation went on, Amara learned that Mark had been driving the car when it crashed. He lost control and hit a tree. Mark got out of the car, but her husband, Lucas, was knocked unconscious and trapped inside as the car caught fire. Amara began to wonder if Mark caused the accident on purpose. She didn't have any proof, just a bad feeling in her stomach. At the funeral, Amara was crying alone when Mark came up to her and said, "Now you're free. I still love you." Amara was angry and slapped him again, saying, "I will never be yours. The only man that matters in my life now is my son." Mark looked really mad and said, "The only son you'll have will be mine." Amara felt very scared. What if Mark really caused her husband's death so he could have her? What if he wanted to hurt her unborn baby too? She was terrified and decided to leave. She rented a quiet house far away from the city, hoping to be safe while waiting for her baby to be born. Amara had enough money from her husband's savings and life insurance to take care of herself and the baby. When Amara went into labor, the hospital room was very busy. Sadly, after some problems during the delivery, Amara was declared dead. The doctors and nurses were very sad because they knew the baby had lost his father, and now his mother too. One of the nurses gently placed the baby on Amara's chest for a moment. The tiny baby started crying loudly, wanting his mom, even though everyone knew she was gone. Suddenly, one nurse noticed something on the heart monitor. Amara was breathing weakly. The doctors jumped into action, and they slowly got her vital signs back to normal. Everyone in the room was so happy to see this miracle happen. Amara opened her eyes, and when she saw her baby, she held him close and kissed him. But then Amara became very scared and yelled, "Mark!" The room went silent as everyone looked at her, confused. The doctor asked her what was wrong. Amara shouted, "Mark is dangerous! You have to stop him!" She told everyone that Mark wasn't a real doctor and that he wanted to hurt her baby. The medical staff looked at each other, unsure of what to think. Just then, the real doctor. Thompson, the doctor, ran into the room looking hurt and in a hospital gown. He told everyone that a man in a hoodie had tricked him, knocked him out, and dressed like him. He managed to escape and came back as fast as he could. He explained that the fake doctor threatened to kill him if he didn't tell him how to stop a baby's heart. The nurses and doctors realized that the person who pretended to be Dr. Thompson was really Mark. They called for hospital security to help. Amara sat in a wheelchair holding her baby. They watched security video footage together, trying to find Mark. Amara was so nervous. Suddenly, she screamed, "It's him! It's Mark!" They all saw the fake doctor tie up the real Dr. Thompson in the basement. The video showed him looking for something until he found a glucose solution. Amara's heart raced as they watched him come into the room where she had just given birth. He seemed ready to do something terrible to her baby. Just as he was about to do it, the baby stopped crying and looked right at him. It was like he said something that scared Mark, and he dropped the baby. Everyone in the room was scared and confused. They didn't know what had just happened. Amara and the nurses looked at each other, confused. They couldn't understand why the baby had said something that scared a man like Mark, who was usually so cold and mean. No one knew what the baby had said, but Amara didn't care. She was crying, holding her baby close, and believed he had saved her life. One of the nurses said that Amara had been dead for a little while, but when her baby cried and hugged her, it brought her back to life. "You're my little hero," she whispered to him, feeling very thankful. The security guards called the police because they knew Mark was dangerous and might still be nearby. They started looking for him right away. Soon, the police radioed that they had seen a man in a doctor's coat walking down the street, and he looked suspicious. When the officers tried to stop him, he ran away. But the police car caught up with him and arrested him quickly. They sent a photo to the hospital, and both Amara and Dr. Thompson recognized him immediately. "It's him," Amara said, her voice shaking with fear. When they searched his things, they found a syringe filled with a sugar solution in his coat pocket. There was no doubt. He was the man who tried to hurt her baby. "The suspect has been arrested," one officer said. Everyone in the hospital felt relieved, especially Amara, who let out a deep breath, finally feeling safe with her little hero in her arms. Days went by, and as Amara played with her son, she asked him softly, "What did you say to that bad man, my love?" Her baby just smiled back, looking like it was all a fun game. She picked him up and covered him with kisses, making him giggle. In his laughter, she found a bit of peace, but deep down, she still had a question that bothered her. Finally, she felt brave enough to listen to the last message her husband Lucas had sent her before the accident. For weeks, she had avoided it, scared to hear his voice one last time. But now she knew it was time. She saw the message had arrived at 3 in the afternoon, the same time the officers said the crash happened. Amara thought her baby should hear his father's voice too, so she put the phone on speaker. "It's important for him to hear his dad," she told herself, even though her heart was racing. When she pressed play, Lucas's voice filled the room. At first, it felt good to hear him, but then she felt scared. Lucas's voice was frantic, saying, "What are you doing? You're out of your mind. We're going to die." Then she heard Mark's cold voice saying, "That's exactly what I want. I'm going to kill you. Don't worry about Amara. Once you're gone, she'll be mine. And your son? I'll take care of him too." Amara felt like her heart was breaking. She realized that Mark had hurt Lucas on purpose, and now she had proof. Tears streamed down her face as she held her baby tight and rushed to the police station. At the station, Amara told the officers everything, and they listened carefully to the recording. They found out Lucas had called her just before the crash. It seemed Mark didn't know the call was still on, so they had caught his terrible plan on tape. With that proof, the police knew they could make sure Mark would stay in jail for a long time. Amara cried tears of relief, finally knowing the truth. But then her sadness turned to anger, and before she could stop herself, She walked toward the jail cells where Mark was held. There he was, lying on a bed, looking so smug, not knowing what was coming. "Mark!" she shouted, her voice shaking with fury. "I have proof you killed my husband. You'll rot in jail for the rest of your life." Mark jumped up when he heard her voice, ready to yell back. But then he saw the baby in her arms, and his face went pale. He screamed, "Get him away from me! Get him out of here!" He was panicking, covering his ears. Amara watched, surprised, as her baby stared at Mark without blinking. Suddenly, she thought she heard her baby say a word very clearly. "Murderer." Amara froze, the word echoing in her mind. Mark was screaming like he was scared of her baby. Police officers rushed in to pull Amara and her son away from the chaos. As Amara walked away, she wondered if she really heard her baby say that word or if it was just her imagination. But it didn't really matter. What mattered was the feeling of peace that washed over her and the joy she felt holding her son close. He had been loved and cared for by her, and that was all that mattered. If you liked this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. See you soon, and may God bless you. Wow, what a journey, right? This story was filled with many feelings, and even though it's just a story, it makes us think. Amara went through a lot, from losing her husband to facing a dangerous man like Mark. It reminds us of our fears, but there's also light. Her baby, even though he was little, helped her keep fighting. The lesson here is about being strong. Life can be very surprising, and sometimes it feels like everything is falling apart. But the strength we find in the people we love can help us through tough times. For Amara, it was her baby who gave her that strength. For us, it might be family, friends, or even just hoping for a better tomorrow. Stories like this can leave us with many questions. Did the baby really say a word, or was it all in Amara's head? Was Mark always a bad guy, or did something happen to make him that way?